All right, it seems like it's slowing down a little bit, so I'll keep admitting people, but you're going to see me like going back and forth a little bit, but so
Can't just
welcome
be short
everyone
for
to
incidents
the
versus
biochar webinar. If you could take a couple
What did
seconds,
it die? Oh,
mute
she didn't
yourself.
say I'm like,
wait.
Yep, we're we're
but I
hearing
don't
some
think like
people in
I
the
don't know my whole
background.
thought is you're gonna be married. Like that's just not coincidence, I
Um,
don't think. Like the same year.
Yeah,
um,
that's
Jen,
crazy.
Jen,
So
you
we're
should
talking about a
I'm
prior.
looking
mute all
all. Yeah,
participants
there we
That's
go.
a model of
in the.
Okay, there we go. So I have muted the entire room. So if you do, once it comes to Q&A, I'll unmute people. But as I said, for folks who had already joined, if you could take a couple seconds to introduce yourself in the chat, that would be great. A little bit of context about why you're here, what your interest in. I'm gonna have to unmute you individually. What your interest in the world of biochar is, we'd love to hear from you. We are hoping that this presentation will provide a broad range of information, whether you know nothing about biochar. Hopefully, it'll give you some introductory stuff. Maybe you have a little bit of experience or a moderate or great amount of experience. Maybe you'll learn a fair amount from there as well. And we're going to end it with some thoughts on how to progress and move forward. There's some workshops, resources. Love to arm you with some tools and resources to move yourself forward. That being said, I am going to turn it over to Deb, but I have to unmute you. And
Yep,
there
should
you
be
go.
good to go. You can hopefully hear me, and in a second, see my screen.
And Deb,
Look
if you
good?
want to introduce yourself, feel free. You
Yeah,
do a better job than I would. So,
I'll give a little spiel. Thanks so much, Jen. And you can see my screen. It's all good there. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So yeah, thanks so much, Jen, for the invitation to be here. Really excited to be talking with you all about biochar, a topic really near and dear to my heart. But I'm Debbie Aller. I'm Senior Extension Associate and the new director of the New York Center for Organics Recycling and Education at Cornell University, which is an evolution of the Cornell Waste Management Institute. So if anyone has utilized the CWMI resources or worked with CWMI in the past, we have rebranded through some support of from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the DEC, into the NYCORE. And so if you start to see NYCORE resources and our team out and about across New York and elsewhere, that's just a little bit of background there. I am a soil scientist by training, and for the last about going on 14 years now, have been working with biochar. And so it's something that I've been really interested in as an organic amendment, and particularly related to its use within agriculture and horticultural environments. So I've really shifted over the years from conducting basic research to doing a lot more focused around practical applications and actually on-farm research. So how do we move biochar from, lab to the actual field and it being used by farmers and other plant care professionals and compost producers and others in a variety of applications. So today, Jen had asked me to give basically a biochar 101, so really an overview of biochar. Even though I've been working with it for many years and it's been around for a long time, it's still a very new or relatively new topic for many out there. And so I'm going to give an overview of biochar and then hone in a little bit about some specifics for basically practical insights for applications to agriculture. A little bit of the thinking that I have and colleagues have in this area of how we might, really get biochar out onto the landscape. And I know there are a lot of composting folks here on the webinar today, so I'll talk about it in terms of its integration into compost and kind of what we're doing in that area. And then feel free to put any questions you have in the chat, or we will have some time for Q&A afterwards. So with that and kind of the limited time that I do have to share a lot of content with you all, I'm going to get started. There we go. And so a lot of what I'm sharing with you today, it is available. Amanda did put together a resource guide, who will be talking after me, a really nice, concise resource guide of some resources that are readily available, freely available online for you all to reference. There's a QR code for ease. So when I was on the board with USBI, I helped in the development of some of these more practical guidelines for biochar applications to agriculture. Different cropping systems, different environments, but just really high level overview. So if you're looking to apply biochar on a farm or you work with farmers who are interested in biochar, these are just really great resources. And it was a host of us that really worked on these to put them together. So it's a really great partnership and a lot of collaboration there. So just highlighting a couple ones that I've really been a part of developing. This was another frequently asked questions document that in the end Rachel Basiri took the lead on, but it basically came out of starting to gather up common questions that I was receiving from folks repeatedly about biochar as it related to applications to soil, as well as other just general questions around biochar. So this ended up being kind of like a 10 or 15 page FAQ that I put together that then a postdoc, Rachel, had time to really expand, and it's gone, I feel like it's 40 pages or something now. So questions related to biochar and compost, biochar field applications. What is biochar? Once again, this is freely available. You can download it, just Control F and find a word that you're really interested in, and we might have an answer or some information there for you about biochar. So that's just kind of a spiel, so you are aware of some resources that do exist that I think have a lot of the information I'm going to provide to you today and can be a good resource down the line. And so jumping right into what is biochar, right? We really all need to be on the same page about what biochar is. And it's a carbon-rich material made through pyrolysis. So we're taking any organic waste material and turning it into biochar, which is a higher value product. And when we talk about organic wastes, we're talking potentially about woody waste residues or crop residues. In certain environments, it's sugarcane bagasse, it could be rice hulls, it could be corn stover residue. And we're not taking those away from, other soil conservation or environmental benefits, but we're taking things that would be entering the waste stream, and we're utilizing those to convert to biochar. And this term pyrolysis, it is basically the heating of organic waste in an oxygen-free or oxygen very limited environment. And so pyrolysis differs from incineration because we are not combusting the material. We are limiting or have no oxygen in the system, so we're not getting that ash and that combusted material we would get from just burning organic materials. And through pyrolysis, we get three what we call co-products. Gases, these are syngases. These can go to electricity production, for example. We get liquids liquids or oils and tars, and these can go to things like bioasphalts and other bio-based products. And then what we're really interested in as a soil amendment is biochar. This is the solid co-product. And so we get something that looks from the starting organic material to something that looks very black and dark, and it really looks like charcoal. And many people use the term charcoal as well, but it does differ slightly from charcoal because it's not really used. We're not using biochar as a fuel source. We're using it as a soil amendment or for some type of environmental remediation or other industrial applications. There are many applications beyond agriculture, but I'm going to focus or am focusing on its agricultural applications. So biochar, after it's been created, it is very carbon rich, typically between 50 to 90% carbon. So what we see is biochars that have been produced from dairy manures, for example, are more around 50% carbon, but biochars produced from our woody waste materials is around 90% carbon. And biochar you can think of it like a sponge in a way. There's different nooks and crannies, small, large, different size pores that are connected differently. And so it's incredibly highly porous material that when applied to the soil helps in retaining and releasing water and nutrients, acting as a home for microbes, and building organic matter, which has a host of beneficial outcomes for soil. And it's a really long-lasting material, which I'm going to get into. And so simply the pyrolysis process makes the organic material more complex. So we go from on the left side here, and not to bore people with chemistry, but essentially the three building blocks uh, of woody materials, cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. And these, through pyrolysis, become these fused compounds that are much more difficult to break down. So I don't want to have a chemistry lesson here, but it's basically we're going from a more simple organic materials to a more complex material that's very stable when it's applied to the soil. And there's a number of other things that happen with biochar during the pyrolysis process. But there's numerous benefits for biochar beyond or within agriculture and beyond environmental. There's a lot of interest in mineland reclamation and environmental remediation. I think Amanda's going to touch upon that a little bit. And there's a lot of industrial applications, and then there's social applications as well, and human health benefits too, particularly in the developing world where a lot of coal is burnt indoors. This can be replaced with more clean cook stoves, for example, and biochar production. And obviously, it's a very important from a waste management perspective as well. And so biochar is not new, as I mentioned. It's a very old technology, let's say, and it's really for a long time been used to improve soils. So it's basically a modern take on a very ancient practice. And it started through a lot of research, or say modern day biochar started through a lot of research that happened in the Amazon basin on what would be typical oxisols or tropical soils, which are highly weathered, kind of nutrient limiting soils that are high in iron oxides, this making them red. And so these are soils that don't typically support really high crop production in this environment, that has high rates of decomposition because of the tropical environment, high temperatures. But we see in those soils, or those oxisols, what we call these terra preta de indio soils. And these were soils essentially through repeated applications of charred material over hundreds of thousands of years, they built up what these anthropogenic dark earth. So these are soils that are basically next to each other in a very similar environment where they have incredibly high, much higher levels of organic matter. They hold on to nutrients, support more water, and have better crop growth, productivity, and yields. And so we tend to see, or through a lot of research and other work happening across the world, there's similar soils basically on every continent. Not everyone, but for the most part, in Europe, Australia, in the US as well, and through these repeated applications of charred material. So we know there's a lot of benefit through the applications of pyrogenic organic matter that we called, or burned organic matter. And so this is essentially how the modern day biochar movement kind of started. And so biochar is not something that's replacing things like compost or manure use or other soil conservation practices on farms, but it's another tool for farmers and also compost producers, which I'll touch upon. So it's really another tool in the toolbox for farmers. It is not a silver bullet solution, and it's best when used in combination with a lot of other practices that focus on regenerative agriculture or help build soil health on farms. So farmers are integrating these practices into their existing management practices to really enhance them. And when we talk about biochar applications in soils, a really, I think, effective way to communicate those, which I'm going to take a little deeper dive into in some later slides, is to utilize these 4 R's: the right source, rate, place, and time. So the 4R came out of the fertilizer industry a number of years ago to help in enhancing or better managing our fertilizer applications in agriculture. And I think this is a really great way to help think about biochar applications as well. And so, as I said, biochar is very stable in soil. So biochars degrade on the hundred to thousands of years time scale. And so if we looked at biochar compared to uncharred organic matter of the same material, we tend to see that there's a fraction, about half the biochar, that does break down on a fairly rapid basis, but at least 50%, typically more, of that carbon is stable for long periods of time, way beyond our lifetimes. And other than actually physically planting trees on the landscape, it's the next best way to help sequester carbon in the environment. So these are complex graphs, and I do tend to, they're actually not that complex, but I like to show these as kind of scientific basis to highlight biochar stability and its the dependence on the feedstock and production conditions, which actually affect biochar stability and other characteristics around biochar properties. And so the figure on the left, some work that was done about a decade ago now, all it's showing is essentially of different organic materials that were used to create biochar, how much of that carbon is remaining in the soil over a certain period of time. So it's taking that figure that I showed previously and just showing it for different organic materials. Everything from a crop residue to a manure to a woody feedstock used to make biochar. And essentially what we see in all cases that there's some variability depending upon the starting organic feedstock, but the majority of the carbon is still remaining in soils years later. And then this figure on the right here, we can directly connect the carbon remaining in biochar to the pyrolysis temperature, so the temperature at which the biochar was produced, so the production conditions. And so we tend to see that the higher production conditions, so higher temperatures that biochars are produced at, lead to the longer stability of carbon in the soil. And we use what we call the hydrogen to carbon ratio, or this H to C ratio here on the x-axis to display biochar stability. And the 0.4 number here is essentially it's the threshold for which we can define biochar as a material. And so this looks complex, but it's essentially just showing the temperature to carbon stability over time. So many of our biochars produced at lower temperatures, 350, 450, they might not have as stable carbon at the end of the day as some of our higher temperature biochars. And when it comes to biochar production, I know this is something that often interests folks, and just, a lot of topics I'm trying to cover in a short amount of time. So some topics I only have a single slide on, but I'm happy to expand on them further if there are specific questions in the Q&A. But biochar production occurs at many scales, everything from our small kilns that double as cook stoves in low income or developing nations, all the way to integrated bioenergy biochar systems that are really optimizing the energy production rather than biochar production. So typically in a slow pyrolysis system, we get a lot more biochar production, and in our fast pyrolysis and gasification systems, we get a lot more gas or oil or liquids production. So depending upon the production conditions and system, we can optimize certain products coming out. And then there's different scales in between. They're mobile units, and these units have been of real interest to the U.S. Forest Service out in the West to actually help manage forest fires by pyrolyzing in situ, essentially, woody debris that would otherwise just flare up and create a forest fire. So there's a lot of interest in these mobile units to go around to different areas where there's a lot of waste building up. A lot of farmers are making their own biochar on their farms from annual prunings in vineyards and orchards and other biomass that builds up on farms. You might see a shipping container that houses a kiln type system. And we have a project right now, or had a project on a New York dairy looking at pyrolyzing dairy manure into biochar and applying that back to the crop fields that then feed the cows. So there's all different scales of production, can really fit depending upon your economics, depending upon how much waste you have going into the system, to really choose what is, the scale of production you're interested in. But with all these different production systems and all these different feedstocks, biochars are an incredibly diverse material, similar to compost, right? We produce compost from different feedstocks, and at the end of the day, yes, we call it compost, but they might have different properties. There's different qualities associated with them, and that's true with biochar as well. And so it's the starting feedstock, as well as the production conditions that lead to a diversity of biochars. So we can have something where we have the same feedstock, different production conditions, and we get essentially different looking material. And so this is just a scanning electron microscope images of switchgrass biochar produced in different types of pyrolysis. And at the end of the day, we get a slightly different material. And this is also true when we have different feedstocks, different production conditions, we get different biochars. And so biochars are diverse, and not just in their particle size, which we can do a lot of what we call post-pyrolysis processing to manipulate things like particle size, but at the end of the day, properties differ between these different biochars. And so biochars have different forms and uses, and they are not all created equal, but I really see this as an advantage within agriculture, within horticulture as well. So we have everything from raw biochars, which are freshly pyrolyzed materials, all the way to liquid biochars, which are essentially micronized or really pulverized biochars. You can think of like an agricultural lime, like almost like a flour, like a very fine powder that then can be used in fertigation or in some type of, they're typically suspended in water or some other liquid slurry, and then they can be sprayed on to soil or foliar or other places. And in between, there's a lot of work going on in these pelletized or prilled or granular biochars, where actually we can create a composite of biochar with like a urea fertilizer, blend those together to then actually apply them at the same time. So we're getting both our nitrogen and our carbon together. And then also these blended biochars. And so there's a lot of interest in the composting world right now behind blending biochar with compost, and there's a lot of synergistic benefits to doing that, and I'll touch about that in a little bit. So across the Northeast, there's different feedstocks used to create biochar. There's several, many companies making biochar across the Northeast. I would say the two predominant feedstocks in our area here, and I know there are people on the webinar not in the Northeast, but I did just kind of have this slide for most of the folks, hopefully. But majority is our woody waste material coming from lumber mills or other entities, and biosolids are becoming, we all know this is an issue across the country, across the world, but there's a lot of interest in creating biochar from biosolids, and there's potentially a lot of benefit for contaminant removal like PFAS as well. So with any organic amendment, just like compost, you can get a test report for biochar. And so this is an example of a biochar lab report. It provides a lot of the information you need when it comes to making decisions about applications to soils, things like the pH, the liming potential, the carbon, are there any, heavy metal contaminants, and what is the nutrient value of that material. If you do have a biochar test report, or if you get one from the company you purchase biochar from, or you send biochar to a lab for testing, you will get something that looks like this. This meets the NRCS 336 standard requirements for biochar testing, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well. If you need help interpreting a biochar test report, similar to getting a compost test report or a soil test report, at USBI, again, put out a fact sheet on how to interpret a biochar lab report. You can scan the QR code right here and it will take you straight to that page. It's, again, very useful information to get you started in what do all these numbers mean. And I think that's really important. We often send test reports to farmers, compost producers, others, and then it's kind of meaningless because you don't know what to do with it. So by providing fact sheets and other readily available information, hopefully we're lowering those barriers and potentially helping increase adoption. So when it comes to availability and cost associated with biochar, 5 years ago, I had a very different slide associated with this, but now there's biochar production it's widely available at farm application scales. Might not necessarily be true in certain states, but across the nation, you can find biochar at scale you need for 100-acre, 500-acre farm for application. That's not to say it's economically viable, but it's available in large quantities now. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it was really being used more in kind of high value niche horticultural applications and much smaller applications. But if you did want to apply biochar at a very large scale, the quantities are there. Costs remain significantly higher than other carbon amendments, compost, manure, other things out there. But you can get biochar for free. You can pay $2,000 a ton for it. And when you talk about a 5-ton per acre application, it adds up. On a national average, we talk about $500 a ton is, I would say, the national average, and that's after speaking with colleagues working in different parts of the country. But the majority of costs associated with biochar is transportation. It's the freight. So sourcing local really helps cut down on those costs. So finding a supplier in your neck of the woods is really valuable, because there are a lot of cost savings for that. A lot of our larger producers, particularly on the West Coast, actually, are essentially giving the biochar away for free and only charging folks freight, because they're offsetting the cost of biochar through carbon credits and carbon markets. So that's really changing the game in terms of getting biochar out on the landscape. Across the Northeast, once again, I honed in on the Northeast just for thinking about folks on the webinar today. But there are various suppliers all the way from Maine to Pennsylvania, across the Northeast. And I do maintain a list myself. So if you want to reach out, and I think Amanda had shared that on the document, but suppliers, they do change, but I tried to break it up into larger scale suppliers. If you're a larger farm looking for, over 1,000-ton, or basically suppliers that would be processing over 1,000 tons of biomass per year, and you get about a 20 to 25% production ratio there. So if you're pyrolyzing 100 pounds of biomass, you'd end up with about 20 to 25 pounds of biochar at the end of the day. So that's the conversion there. And then there's smaller suppliers as well. Building out from a kind of local supplier, the American Farmland Trust, through their Biochar Atlas project at a national scale, they have developed a map, which is mapping suppliers across the entire US. So no matter where you are, you can probably find a supplier closer to you. So that is just a resource. I've provided that link there. When it comes to, okay, I'm just being mindful of time and how many slides I have left. But I think this is an important point to make about biochar certifications and standards. And so for any industry to really grow, you need to have quality standards before people are really going to adopt that material to make sure it's safe for application to soils. So previously, the only organization that had standards, or there were two basically at the international scale, the IBI, or the International Biochar Initiative, they set up a certification program that was voluntary and had been around since 2013. The European Biochar Commission also has a standards out there. And really the idea behind creating standards and a certification is for producers to meet minimum requirements to make sure it's safe for soil application. So we're not introducing contaminants, we're not introducing volatiles. It's not harmful at the end of the day or detrimental to the soil for application to the soil. And the idea behind creating standards, right, is that biochars are diverse, as I mentioned, and the industry wants to provide certainty to customers, and it helps stabilize the market. So up until just a couple months ago, last fall, there were no standards set in the US. Now the first standards were released, and this was a partnership through the US Biochar Initiative. I think this is the American National Standards Institute and ASPE that help basically in the development of test methods. And so methods for measurement and testing of biochar. This first standard was created for the US biochar industry, and there are two more standards currently in process in development. around biochar safety. One is related to data reporting and availability of biochar, and another one is this do no harm standard to essentially make sure it's safe for any perceived problems. So this is, I say this because if you're purchasing biochar, it's really important that certain suppliers in the industry as a whole meets these standards. So I think you get the idea that biochar, because it's so diverse, it leads itself or ends up having different impacts in any given environment. And so we have these kind of soil by crop, by biochar, by environment, by management practices dependent. And so when people ask me, how much should I apply? It's like, well, what's the biochar you're using? What's your soil type? Where are you growing? And what management practices you implement. So essentially, I say it depends because it does. It depends on all these factors. And biochar properties do change over time as well. And there's a lot of work for a number of years been going into creating designer biochars or biochars essentially for specific end uses, whether it be agricultural applications or mine land reclamation or cosmetics, for example. So taking a bit of a deeper dive and moving away from that kind of very introduction to biochar there, and hopefully it was relatively basic, especially if it's biochar is a new topic for you. But moving a little bit more into the agricultural applications that we see benefits for tremendous benefits across many different agricultural properties, both crop and soil, as well as the environment. But this is a really nice review article that was published a number of years ago now. That's a summary essentially of meta-analysis. So of thousands of studies, hundreds and thousands of studies that have occurred across the globe as it relates to biochar applications and impacts on crop productivity. And what we see is that there are improvements in yield, there are improvements in a host of crop parameters, bacterial and fungal communities, and there's reductions in things like leaching and heavy metal uptake to plants. So this is a slide that many folks, when they're talking about biochar impacts on agriculture, do present because it's a really nice summary. And what we see for crop yields is we do tend to see again across many studies 11 to 28% compared to no biochar control. We'll say the majority of significant crop yield improvements we see are in our tropical environments, but then also our sandy and our degraded soils. And so I will touch upon why that is or some insights into that. And also, I just want to have this more as so it's a resource for you all. But biochar improves soil health, as I mentioned, and it's another tool for farmers. And this is just a summary of many of the soil properties that biochar impacts. So when you're thinking about biochar application to soil and actually getting it out on the landscape, a really important thing to ask is, what is your resource concern? So the resource concern, this is a term used by the NRCS. So basically, what is the problem you're trying to solve when it comes to biochar applications? Biochar is not a one-size-fits-all material, as I've said. And so if you're a farmer or an end user of biochar, why do you want to use biochar, right? And I think this is an important way to then thinking about correctly making applications to the soil and getting the most bang for your buck from biochar applications because it's an investment. And so are you looking to improve water retention? Are you looking to build organic matter? Are you helping to offset soil acidity? Why? And I think this is an important question to ask, just like why apply fertilizer, right? And so it's the same idea with biochar. And so getting back to this idea of utilizing the 4Rs when we think about biochar applications, the right source. So what source of biochar should I use? The right rate, how much should I apply? The right place, where should I apply it? And when should I apply it at the right time? And so the right source, local, available, sustainable. Like I said, I would say the most widely available materials here in the Northeast and in New York are produced from woody waste material. They might be a combination of hard and softwoods. And like I said, biosolids are more of interest. In some parts of the country, biochar produced from poultry manures or hog manure might be more readily available. So the right place, where do I apply biochar? And I always show this slide in my biochar talks because I really think it gets the point across, or I hope it gets the point across. And it's kind of like, why are you showing the Central Valley of California? But this was some work done by one of my friends in graduate school, and it was some modeling work. But it's led to some decision support tools that are being used right now to help folks make decisions about where to apply biochar. And what we see is that we can directly link soil parameters, soil quality, with the potential of biochar to have a positive response on crop yields and soil properties. And so what you can see here within the Central Valley is that on the east side of the Central Valley, we tend to have more acidic soils, soils that have lower soil organic matter, soils that have lower cation exchange capacity. So essentially, we can say these are poorer quality soils, whereas the exact opposite is true for the western side of the Central Valley. We have more alkaline soils, higher soil organic matter, higher cation exchange capacity. And what we see is that the potential for having a positive response from biochar differs between the east and west side. So where we have our lower quality soils, the likelihood of having a positive yield response from biochar is higher. And the opposite is true for our higher quality soils. And so thinking about biochar applications to our sandier soils, our more degraded soils, this might help with, well, basically having strategic applications of biochar on the landscape. I know in New York and other parts of the Northeast, there's there's a lot of heavy clay soils. And we often focus on sandier soils just because the impacts tends to be way more apparent, but there are potential benefits to applying biochar to clay soils as well. And so this work led to decision support tools that are freely available. Hopefully most people on this call know about Web Soil Survey. This is a tool by the USDA NRCS. And a couple of years ago, they built out this dynamic soil properties response to biochar tool. So it essentially overlays soil maps with where biochar is going to, you're likely to see an impact of that biochar. So essentially it takes this map and it built it into the Web Soil Survey tool. And so red is where we have a very negligible impact, and green is likely where we have an excellent impact of biochar when it comes to crop yields and soil improvements. And that's because, once again, we can match up soil properties with potential for a biochar response, or a response through a biochar application, sorry. The other tool I want to mention that's being built out is this Biochar Atlas. And so this was a tool, or a series of tools, that was developed originally for the Pacific Northwest through one of my colleagues at ARS out there, but it's being built out in partnership with USBI and American Farmland Trust into a national biochar tool where you can essentially select a certain biochar for a specific soil and match it up with a problem that you have, and it will recommend what biochar you should be applying within that environment. There's also, they've added in this cost benefit analysis tool, can help tell you, essentially the economics around it. And so these tools, while they're still being expanded and improved upon, they are available to help farmers and end users make more informed decisions about biochar. Okay. The last one, when it comes to the 4 Rs, is the right rate. No, we're only on the third one. Right rate, that more is not always better. What I said is biochar application rates depend because of all these interacting effects taking place. I typically provide folks with a range of biochar application rates. And that takes into account often the economics associated with the costs of the biochar and the application of it, but also how much benefit you get, and also what are the other management practices and your nutrient management plan. And so we do see a lot of benefit from small application rates. And once again, it depends on what is your goal with applying biochar. So this just gives you some ranges. Really, I know there are people who apply more than 10 tons per acre, but I think for farmers, it's way too expensive, especially if you're a larger scale farmer. That's not possible. If you're doing container production or tree plantings, some of these, basically, this is the rough range where we do see a benefit from biochar applications. And it can be a replacement to media or peat as a soilless media and other kind of non-renewable materials that go into those products. And so another thing that's really talked about, and I get a ton of questions related to this with biochars, is inoculating, charging, or blending. So people use these words kind of interchangeably. They do mean slightly different things, but for the sake of time, I'm just kind of combining them together. And so what we know, right, is that pyrolysis, we essentially get an inert material in the biochar. But the biochar acts as the backbone. It's the physical structure that then can help support microbial life, retain water and nutrients, and act like a slow release fertilizer applied in the soil. There's a lot of interest happening right now around biochar-based fertilizers, kind of what I mentioned with prilled or granular biochars, where we can combine carbon and nitrogen and create one single product that then can be applied. But this kind of, I would say it's still in its infancy, that area. But we get a lot of benefit when we mix biochar with compost, with manure, with microbial solutions, and you're essentially getting the best of both worlds, I think, in this space. You're getting the more recalcitrant or that backbone, that framework from the biochar, and the more labile or readily available nutrients and the biology with that carbon there. So you're getting both. And also this blending of materials can help limit any immobilization that farmers or others are concerned about when it comes to soil application. When it comes to the time associated with blending biochar with compost or inoculating it prior to field application, I'd say there's no tried and true rule. No one says absolutely this. Kind of once again, there's consensus that there's a range of time. 1 to 3 weeks has kind of been that, at least in the circles of colleagues that I've worked with and others, and kind of on the practical side of things as well, that 1 to 3 weeks inoculation or blending before soil application is sufficient to really kind of charge that biochar material. These are just some images of what we see, and for the compost producers on the webinar today, there's a lot of benefit, or there's been shown to be benefit to applying biochar at the start of the composting process to actually help speed up the composting process, minimize odor, and lead to a higher quality product at the end of the day. And so based on the literature, we see kind of about a 10%, 5 to 10%, maybe a little higher incorporation of biochar to compost by volume provides a lot of that benefit. The biochar can also be mixed with compost teas if you use a liquid product and soaked there, which really helps with actually getting the biochar out on the landscape to reduce dust and things like that. And then the biochar can be essentially field inoculated if you broadcast it over, say, a legume cover crop and then incorporate that. You get the nitrogen released from the cover crop, and then you get the carbon benefit from the biochar. Once again, a couple images from farms here in New York where biochar has been blended with compost before application. So this picture on the right, this is a trial in the Hudson Valley where we're actually incorporating biochar into compost at a 25% and 50% by volume to the planting beds. Okay, I'm going a little bit over my time, but I know Amanda said I had a few extra minutes and could sneak into her time. But the last R here is the right time, and both single or repeated applications of biochar do work. And I think this time, some of my colleagues talk about the 3 Rs, I talk about 4 Rs, and it's really more because of perennial cropping systems where I think the time aspect is important. Single applications, I think, are more ideal within our perennial cropping system. So thinking about orchards, vineyards, or nursery production, where you really have a lot of benefit to site preparation prior to planting, and where that biochar can get incorporated deeper into the future rooting zone of the plant. And so this might be better than it is better than just top dressing the biochar over a perennial crop, but getting it deeper into the profile has a lot more benefit. Repeated applications, so smaller scale applications over time, they're more economical, and they might better align with management practices of that farm. So just some considerations that both work. So thinking about ways to apply biochar and at different scales, so whether you're a small scale farmer, a larger farmer, or you're a compost producer, having a front end loader is very helpful when it comes to moving biochar around. But I'm just going to show a few images and videos of applications on farms. So broadcast applications, this is just surface applications with then hopefully some type of incorporation into the soil, because biochar is a very light material. It will blow away by wind, or it will leave fields by water as well, heavy precipitation events. So getting it incorporated into the soil is very important. There are precision applications of biochar as well, using a liquid manure to inject it into the soil, drop spreaders, banding it, and incorporating it within no-till drills. So these are all ways, if you do more precision nitrogen management, this is a way biochar can fit into your applications. For many of our smaller scale producers, whether you're producing compost at a small scale, or you have a small farm or home garden, hand applications and incorporations, another way that biochar can be applied. One project that I've been involved in and I'm still involved in is basically utilizing, can we use everyday farm equipment or equipment that's widely available on farms to apply biochar? And the answer is yes. And so this is a project I'm involved on, and this is a farmer who's utilizing a lime spreader. And a lime spreader is a great piece of equipment that many farmers have on their farms or have access to, that we can spread biochar as well. So I just have a couple short videos to show this. And so this is spreading the biochar over that legume cover crop. And then in the spring, the farmer, so this was fall applied, and in the spring, the farmer would till in the cover crop along with the biochar and get 150 pounds of nitrogen from their legume cover crop, and along with that additional carbon from the biochar. So the idea of building soil health here. Another way, this is a smaller scale system utilizing a drop spreader. And that person's on top of the equipment, just pushing the biochar compost blend to make sure it flows evenly through the spreader. So this can be applied directly to beds. The last short video is a larger scale manure spreader. So this is for some of our dairy and livestock, or sorry, dairy and field crop farms. So the idea with that is that biochar can be utilize or spread out on the landscape through many different types of equipment that are commonly available. Just some other considerations, whether you might be producing a biochar product or utilizing it at the end of the day. Moistening the biochar before application helps minimize dust and reduce any loss, whether it be through wind or water erosion. Not applying this very light material on a windy day, strongly advise that. Getting the biochar incorporated into the soil, that's just not from like an environmental perspective in terms of potentially losing that biochar to the landscape, but also to get the potential benefit from the biochar, getting it incorporated into the soil, into the future rooting zone of perennial crops in particular. You get a greater benefit there. Using appropriate personal protective equipment if needed, like an N95, gloves, glasses. You don't want to be inhaling fine particles or getting in your eyes. It can be really annoying. As I mentioned previously, other ways that are, might be improving applications of biochar, particularly at large scales, are these pelletized or prilled products that come in kind of different sizes here. They help really reduce transportation costs because you can get more in a smaller volume, and just help with flowing through equipment and reducing potential losses there. So the last thing I want to mention is this Conservation Practice Standard 336. This is the Soil Carbon Amendment Standard that's in the USDA NRCS National Registrar of Soil Conservation Practices. So I believe this is still the newest conservation practice that was added to the registrar. It was traditionally, or this started as the Intern Standard 808 back in 2021. And today, or as of 2025, it had been adopted by all but 3 states. I actually believe Alabama has adopted it now too, but only the Dakotas essentially do not have this within the state level conservation practice standards. So if you are a farmer, this is something where you work closely with your NRCS office and you can get financial assistance for utilizing biochar and compost on your farms. So they vary a little bit at the state level, so it's important you work within your state with your local NRCS office. And the whole idea is to get more carbon into the landscape to help from a soil health, soil conservation perspective. There are requirements that you need to meet, or the biochar and the compost need to meet in order to get this. So this is also, I think, advantageous for compost producers or producers of biochar too, to work with farmers, making sure you have a high quality product. It meets these assurance programs or certifications, and it's a clean material. But I want to highlight this. I'm happy to expand more if there are specific questions, but just recognizing this is available. A lot of people are not aware that this is out there, and so just work with your NRCS office to potentially get some cost share there. For the sake of time, I'm just going to post up these summary points. You'll all have access to these slides, but just it really summarizes what I've said over the last 45 minutes or so. And if there are questions after this, feel free to shoot me an email. If you have specific questions to your operation, I'd be happy to help as much as I can. Apologies, Amanda, for running a little bit into your time, but that was a lot of content. I hope it was helpful to folks, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, and thank you. I hope everybody here can join me in recognizing what an extraordinary resource, Deb, you are. Yeah, Jesse, echoing that. Wow, thank you. Yeah, you are phenomenal. And we look forward to working with you. So there were some questions we thought we would maybe give the lecture part a little bit of a break and go to some interaction. There were a couple of questions that came in, Deb, I can read them to you if you want to check them out. And then there were a few that got embedded into the introductions. So do you want to?
Let me just open up. Yep, I have the chat open here. Let me see. Maybe you could help.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can. They're embedded within the chat.
There are a few that are, but the one that came up in 2 different places is how to considerations with no-till practices. So one person was pretty generic, like how do you use this with her no-till practice, and then Ian chimed in about how do you integrate it and apply it like as a top dress situation when you have a no-till. So I feel like no-till got too.
Yeah, and that's a great question. That's something I've gotten I've received a lot of questions from farmers on. And that's typically because, right, we've really had this no-till movement. We want to be disturbing the soil as little as possible. And for our larger scale producers, a lot of that has come at, herbicide applications, but for our smaller scale diversified, no-till has always been a practice there. And so when it comes to no-till application for biochar, one of the things I've seen, and I showed an image of, is utilizing a no-till drill. So the biochar can actually be put into a no-till drill and injected down into, fields or at site preparation. If you do any type of broad forking, because everyone does some type of soil manipulation. So even with no-till, we're still disturbing a small amount of the soil, right? Because we need to get the crop planted. And so when you're doing kind of any of those soil preparation practices, that would be the time when you would also want to be thinking about applying the biochar. So if you do have access to a no-till drill, or you do any kind of, light manipulation of the soil, that's when to think about the biochar applications. I have top dressed biochar in soils for projects before. The only reason I'm providing the advice to get it incorporated at least a couple inches to the soil is because of the lightweight material. And I've had it applied where after a heavy precipitation event, it was not where I originally applied it. It had run off the field if there's any slope, and also with wind. And so getting it any way you can get it a little bit incorporated, even if it's only into the planting row, that would be most favorable. So it's a little bit tricky, but I think utilizing some of the other practices you do as a no-till grower, it still can be added.
Beautiful. And feel free if anybody wants to come off mute, or Ian or Mary, if you have follow-up questions to Deb's answer, Deb's answer response, that would be great. If you do come off mute, if because of the way my windows are, if you could maybe do the hand raise thing, or just start talking, and we'll definitely grab you. John Craig.
Okay,
Yeah,
I don't know how to do the hand raise thing, so I'll just chime in really quick.
go for it, Ian.
Yeah, so my question pertained more towards hay fields, which I guess you touched on a little bit when you mentioned using a manure spreader. So I didn't know if there was any more details that you could provide as far as that goes.
Yeah, so for hay fields, definitely there's some of those pictures using a compost or manure spreader or a lime spreader. And if you do have cover on the soil there already, you don't necessarily need to further incorporate it. It will slowly work into the soil. It will, take a long period of time, but if you have any earthworm activity or other things, it will work into the soil. Also, if you have any type of, if you have animals on the landscape too, hoof traffic, other, traffic on the soil surface will actually help work the biochar down into the soil. But I don't know if in your field you do, any seeding or planting at different points in the year, but utilizing that no-till drill if you have access to one, I think that would be a good way. But some of the incorporation is, it's not important, but it's a little bit less important if you already have permanent living roots and a cropping system there. I'm talking about bare soil applications. You don't want to leave it with absolutely nothing on the soil surface.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. John Craig had three. He's wondering about a Southern California, I'm assuming that's what SoCal means, supplier. He's asking, I believe, if aged biochar degrades over time. And thirdly, he wants to know how does it speed up the composting process? And John, I invite you as well to come off mute if there's anything you wanted to elaborate on those three questions.
Yeah, then there's actually one more that's more important probably is that you said something about PFAS, and I'm not sure where the PFAS would come from for the source material, but then the pyrolysis process you said takes away any PFAS. Want to just clarify that?
Yeah, I'll touch upon that first before your other ones. Yeah, and I didn't expand on that. But so that's really, at least, I'm not sure where you are, John, but in New York, the conversation around biosolids and land application of biosolids has been
Okay.
a very hot topic. I know it's a very hot topic in other parts of the country as well. And biosolids are, we know they're contaminated with PFAS. So this forever chemical, these polyfluoroalkyl substances, probably most people have heard of PFAS at this point. But if you have no idea what they are, just Google them. But don't get scared. You'll be scared if you Google them. But essentially, there's a lot of work. So within biosolids, there's a lot of PFAS, and this largely comes through industrial wastewater plants. So wastewater treatment plants that receive wastewater from industrial sources. That's really how it's entering the system. Wastewater treatment plants that are from domestic sources tend to have much lower PFAS. But PFAS compounds come from very everyday items that we all use, nonstick cookware, fire-resistant clothing, things like that. There's PFAS in them. And so these have entered our wastewater treatment plants. And so there's a lot of work going on right now of how do we remediate contaminated wastewater? How can we make this more safe when we do have to land apply it? And so there's a lot of work happening. That pyrolysis is a very promising technology for removing PFAS from the waste stream, from organic materials, mainly biosolids. A lot of work had come out of Europe. Now there's a lot more happening in the US, but through the pyrolysis process, and typically the higher the temperature of the pyrolysis process is, we can remove PFAS compounds, of the measurable PFAS compounds, up to 99%. I'm not an engineer.
Nice.
I don't work on the production side as much. I know a lot of people working in that space, but there's a lot of evidence showing that pyrolysis destroys these PFAS compounds at the end of the day for our biosolids, biochars.
So when you say destroys, I mean, so it's not going into the atmosphere. It's, I mean, completely altered and
No, it's changing the chemistry, and then there's also scrubbers that are on these pyrolysis systems as well, so they can be captured. And then there's but they might be broken down into smaller particles as well. So
okay.
they're not being emitted to the atmosphere as far as I know. And they're not ending up. They're kind of being captured in other parts of the process or being broken down into smaller and smaller particles.
And then so I can order when I get the when I buy biochar, I can pretty much guarantee that there's not going to be any PFAS in there.
You should. It should be. But what I'm saying is, so just like with compost, right? If you have contaminated material going in, you're likely going to have contaminated material coming out. And so we're focusing on, waste materials, but that are clean waste materials. So a lot of people just say, hey, I'm selling biochar. I think it's important to know what type of biochar are you purchasing? Is it a woody feedstock? Is it made from biosolids? There are companies in New York selling biosolids biochar to farmers. So I think it's important to be aware of as a purchaser of it. Currently, there's no requirement for biochar to be tested for PFAS, and I see that question just came in. There's no requirement there, but our only concern really for PFAS is when it's produced from biosolids there.
Okay.
Not
Okay.
from, not our woody biochars,
Right.
not our crop residue. It's if you're purchasing biochar made from biosolids. But there's a lot of those producers they do test for PFAS, I will say. So as far as I know, they're not selling people PFAS, but I'm actually involved in a trial right now. Or they're not selling contaminated biochar, but I'm involved in a trial right now that's actually looking at the application of biosolids biochar and the availability of that in the environment, whether it's taken up by crops or does it have any impact from a soil health standpoint. So this is an active area of research. There's no requirement right now, but if producers are making biochar from biosolids, they are testing it for PFAS, but not other feedstocks. All biochars, they do get tested for heavy metals, and that is in that lab report that I showed as well. And that's a requirement, especially if you're applying for NRCS funding. It has to be below thresholds for heavy metals. So that is currently a requirement, but not the PFAS.
Thank you. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
And
And
Deb,
then-
Did I fog out for a second? Did you touch on the converse side of it where there's some research being done and some favorable results of the remediation impacts of biochar on PFAS? Like on the other side of it where soil might be contaminated with PFAS, there is some research emerging for some hopeful they don't make it go away, but they make it inert.
Yeah, so that's a whole another side of the research too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't touch upon that as well, but there is a lot of work happening right now in applying biochar to already contaminated soils. Actually, there's quite a few studies I think happening in Maine because they've really been at the forefront of the PFAS issue, and there have been a number of studies there looking at applying biochar at different rates to see does it take up PFAS? Does it limit bioavailability to plants? Does it limit leaching of it? And I think they're seeing some promising results initially, but I'm not as up to date on that work. And Amanda might say a little bit more about remediation as well.
Cool.
And I want Amanda to have a little bit of time. I don't
Yeah.
want to monopolize this. So I'll answer some of the other questions in the chat
Perfect.
there. And if anyone does want to follow up with me separately, feel free to.
Yeah, and we'll make sure we capture if we do run out of time, we'll capture all the questions, and when we follow up with the recording and the slides, we will answer remaining questions, and of course, then there'll be a reminder of the resources. So, yay, Amanda, take all the time you need as well. I mean, yeah.
No worries. I will be
Yeah.
quick. All right, let me just share my
You
screen.
don't
I
have
think
to be.
no worries. One moment. Let me just get this working right. Let's see.
Perfect.
Check. Can you still see it? Or did it change? I think it
It
might have
changed.
changed. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Good
One
see.
moment, please. We will get that up. Okay. Can everyone see everything in here?
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Great. Well, thanks everyone so much for being here. I'm really excited to be joining this webinar too. And thank you, Debbie, for that amazing walkthrough of the Biochar 101. So I'm just going to chat really briefly. I've been partnering with Jen on some recent biochar initiatives and making biochar more accessible on farm. And I've been doing some research at SUNY Plattsburgh, working on sort of tailoring biochar applications for North Country soils. But actually wasn't planning on talking about remediation, but I think Jen will be talking a bit about that after. And just to introduce myself, I'm assistant professor of biology over at SUNY Plattsburgh. I actually just started just a couple of years ago. And before this was doing more research looking at how a broad range of soil management practices by shifting microbial communities could actually increase plant defenses to insect pests and soil pathogens and all that sort of good stuff. And so when I started here, I had a student who was really excited about biochar. We started doing some studies. It was like, oh my gosh, like there are huge effects. And so I really transitioned to focusing on using biochar to improve soil health and increase crop yields and thinking about other aspects of plant defenses and things that could be impacted too. I just wanted to mention that biochar is a really rapidly growing area of research. My research is just one little part in it. But there's sort of a bunch of different themes too. There's a ton of research right now on that remediation piece. So looking at heavy metal removal, since biochar actually will bind to heavy metals and immobilize them in the soil. Same for organic pollutants. There's quite a bit of research looking at how different pesticides can also be absorbed to the biochar and made less bioavailable. And also for things like PAH. There are some promising effects of biochar for helping with that as well, both of being applied into the soil or even like in a filter that could be used to get stuff out, and then that filter could be removed. There's a ton of research as well on different aspects of carbon sequestration, on different methods of engineering the biochar. Like Debbie was talking about, getting specifically engineered biochars for specific purposes by using certain pyrolysis temperatures and so on. But I'll be focusing on the soil fertility piece. I also think about biochar most in terms of how we can use it to improve soil health, how we could use it as a fertilizer when we combine it with different amendments, and how we could do that to best improve yields. And so biochar research as a whole has sort of shifted in the past couple of years. It used to be like, does it work? And like, yeah, it does. But there is a lot of variability. So now much of the research is focusing on under what conditions, for how long, and like at what cost would biochar work for understanding when it's appropriate to apply to a certain field, at what rate, and so on. All the awesome stuff that Deborah already talked about. And so some of the major research gaps that are still there really are focusing on this context dependency. There are amazing tools already being created, like Debbie talked about, but having even more fine scale information to know how much should you apply, which type of biochar. I think a lot about effects on microbial communities. And so trying to be able to predict what would happen so we can know what we should use. We also do need more long-term field studies. And of course, the research I'll be showing you is short-term stuff that we've been doing in the past couple of years. But since biochar's properties can change as it ages over time in the soil, understanding those impacts would be really helpful. And something I'm particularly interested in is thinking about co-applications of biochar with other practices and thinking how we can optimize it to improve maybe not only yield, but like resistance to insect pests and pathogens and drought. So thinking about combining with fertilizers, organic amendments, composts, and even cover crops. There's really promising research, but we don't have all of the nitty-gritty of it figured out yet. And lastly, we're continuing to try to figure out the economic feasibility, like how much yield increase would you get to know that it's worth applying the biochar. And again, there are already some tools that have been created that Debbie was talking about, which are a great step to being able to work through this. And so the research that I'll be talking about fits into these parts. So thinking mostly about this context dependency and interaction with other practices. And so the first project that I'll be telling you about was one where we were actually considering multiple different factors. So biochar, as well as different organic fertilizers, when you apply them to soil, you change the soil properties and organic matter that's there. But you also shift the fungal and bacterial communities that are there as well. And something that I'm really interested in is called the rhizosphere. So it's the soil that's right around the root. And in that area are particular bacteria and fungi that can be really beneficial for plants. So they can increase plant growth, increase plant defenses to things like insect pests or pathogens. They can even help make more nutrients available to plants, or things like mycorrhizal fungi could actually trade nutrients to the plant for carbon. And so I was really interested in how combinations of biochar with organic fertilizers, by changing these things in the soil, could impact crop yields, resistance to aphids, and also resilience to flooding, which is not something you think about as much with biochar. It holds water really well, and so it often really, really helps with drought. But with all of the recent floods that we've been having in the North Country lately, I was really interested in seeing the impacts there. And so we had hypothesized that biochar, because it can actually absorb toxins, and plants will produce certain toxins when they're in flooded conditions, that could actually help promote plant growth during flooding, promoting plant growth, promoting microbes that could help them, reduce nutrient leaching, and then help make them more resilient. Though since biochar holds more water, there was the possibility that it actually could slow the recovery of the plants after flooding. And then we had predicted that yields would be highest when plants were amended with biochar and organic fertilizers. And so to do this experiment, we partnered with North Point Community Farm, who very kindly let us dig up a whole bunch of soil from their field. We then applied either no fertilizer, alfalfa meal, poultry litter or chicken manure, biochar, and then combinations of biochar with those fertilizers, which we standardized for total nitrogen. And then we planted the bok choy seeds in, let them grow for a couple of weeks, and then we flooded half, didn't flood the other half, allowed them to drain, and then actually added aphids to half the plants to look to see if there was actually an impact of biochar on resistance to aphids. Growers in this area often have a lot of issues with aphids on bok choy, where densities can get so high that it could actually kill the plant. And so after that, we measured a whole bunch of different things that for the sake of time, I won't be able to walk through. We actually just finished extracting DNA from the soil samples that we'll be submitting. So hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll have that data on the microbial communities. But for now, I'm just going to share some of our results for yield. So in this graph, the different bars are showing the different treatments. So we have the control over here all the way on the left that had nothing added to it. The next are the plants that had had alfalfa meal added, then chicken, biochar, alfalfa and biochar, and chicken and biochar. And so you can see that when you add just fertilizer, it does increase the yield as you would expect. But when you added it in combination with biochar, there's a substantial increase. And with that chicken and biochar, there's like nearly a doubling in the size of the plants. We were really surprised because the soil was actually a pretty high organic matter soil. It was like a silty loam. And normally you wouldn't expect that much of an increase, but we did. You could always pick out in the greenhouse, like, oh yeah, that one definitely had chicken and biochar. And so then we also had the flooding treatment. And in that case, of course, everything was smaller because the flooding is going to stress the plants out. But even still, there are improvements in growth with the fertilizer, and especially when you have the fertilizer and biochar. So adding biochar definitely was to no detriment to the plants that had had flooding. We're still seeing that increase. And then interestingly for the aphids, biochar did seem to help a bit. So I know this graph is a little bit complicated. So again, over here, we have our control where we had nothing added. And so compared to that, when you add fertilizer, especially that poultry litter, there's quite a few more aphids. And this makes sense when plants have more nitrogen. Aphids really like nitrogen. It's kind of like candy for them. They use it to grow really fast. And so with more nitrogen available in the plant, they're going to be able to grow and reproduce more quickly. But interestingly, in those plants that had the same amount of chicken manure, but also biochar, even though those plants were larger and looked really, really great, like bright green leaves and everything, they actually had fewer aphids. So it does seem like that treatment is actually increasing the resistance of those plants to aphids. And under flooding, again, there's fewer aphids because the plants were super stressed out. They were quite tiny. But still, with the chicken and biochar, we actually see fewer aphids on those plants. And so we are finding, like a lot of other research has too, that putting biochar with those organic fertilizers really, really does help. It still helps even in the face of flooding. It may also actually increase resistance to insect pests like aphids. And so we're currently measuring the soil nutrients in the microbial communities to figure out the exact mechanisms by which biochar is having these effects. And we're also starting to consider different concentrations of biochar to figure out what's most appropriate for different soil types in the North Country. And so this project has been headed up by my research student, Dagan Benoit, who's pictured down there. So in this experiment, we were trying out 2 different soil types that we collected from farms up here, one that was a more sandy soil and one that was a loam. And then we used 5 different concentrations of biochar, so from none, 1, 5, 10, and 20 tons per hectare. And then for all of these plants, we added that chicken manure that we had used before at the same rate. And so sort of unexpected in the loam soil that we had, this was a different soil that we had used in the other experiment, there really wasn't much of an effect of adding biochar on the overall yield that we saw from those plants. But interestingly, in the sandy soil, we saw the exact opposite of what we expected. So as Debbie was talking about earlier, most times in a sandy soil, when you add biochar, you would see an increase in yields. It's increasing the ability to hold nutrients and hold water. But we actually found the opposite effect. And we think the reason for that, which you can probably notice in the pictures of the plants down here, was that the biochar was immobilizing the nutrients that were there. These were relatively low nutrient soils, and even though we did add fertilizer with the biochar, I don't think we added enough fertilizer. And so the biochar, by really sort of absorbing those nutrients sort of like a sponge and holding them in the short amount of time of the study, that was enough to actually reduce the growth of the plants, really highlighting the importance of making sure that you are adding enough fertilizer with the biochar that's there. And so we're hoping to expand this. This was a smaller pilot study that we did in the fall. We're hoping to look at more different North Country soil types, thinking about optimizing applications of biochar with fertilizers and composts, and hopefully doing some field trials as well. And so I'll close there to make sure Jen has a little bit of time to talk. Thank my many wonderful research students. I don't know if we have time for questions, but if you have any, please feel free to throw them into the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. I can do my part in the wrap up. So there were some more questions that came through, and I know Deb's been fast and furious seeing there. But to you, Amanda, John Craig, who's got the most amazing questions and engagement. Thank you. He asked why fewer aphids. What's
That
your
is a
theory?
great question and something we are currently trying to figure out. So it's not due to differences. We thought maybe like differences in the toughness of the leaves could contribute to it, and that doesn't seem to be it. We're going to be measuring the ratio of like carbon to nitrogen in the leaves. because it could be that while the plant is larger, the leaves themselves might actually have lower concentrations of nitrogen within them that may allow the aphids to not grow as fast since the plant isn't quite so much like candy. The other potential thing is that maybe some of the defenses that in the bok choy were actually increased, which is one that I'd be really excited about. So bok choy plants, like other brassicas, have these compounds called glucosinolates. It's actually the thing that when you like eat mustard, it's really spicy. Those are the glucosinolates that are doing it. And so it's possible that these treatments are actually leading to an increase in those defenses in the plants. And so we're hoping in follow-up experiments to dive more into that to figure out what the exact mechanisms are. Yeah, fantastic question. And I wish I had the answer for you now, but hopefully we'll have it soon.
That's great. I know all these trials and research lead to like more questions and
Right?
rabbit holes to dive down. And just to note too, we will do the best that we can to capture the chat because I know some of Deb's responses and John Craig and Craig Coker both have had great questions. But one question that was way back up, maybe Deb to you, is about integrating biochar into vermiculture and vermicomposting.
I missed that one.
It
Sorry.
was way up. It was in an introduction. It was like,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, actually, I have no experience of incorporating biochar into vermicomposting, and I haven't looked into that. So I'm gonna refrain from saying anything about that. I don't know. If anyone has experience, I'd love to hear, but I've not done anything or looked into that literature at all myself.
Cool. Is there anybody out there who wants to come off mute to weigh in?
I run a worm farm, and I have used biochar with the initial composting process, and also take that compost and feed it to my worms. And it seems that the population of the worms increases unscientifically. Just my observation. The so the population is getting larger and the worms getting fatter. And I'm assuming that's because the worms are eating more. There's more available microbes for them to eat. I'm guessing.
That's awesome.
But I do have one other question. There's the biochar that was added to the loamy soils. There's no noticeable increase, and just saying because the nutrients weren't being released to the plants. It's like, was that biochar charged or?
Yeah, so it was not charged ahead of time. We just applied it directly with fertilizer. Though interestingly, we had done the exact same thing in the study that I showed before, where we did see big increases in yield. So I think it's more to the difference in soil texture, but yeah, adding more fertilizer or charging it more ahead of time could definitely help. The loam soil that we had a really high level of soil organic matter. So it's possible that adding the biochar just didn't add that much more to it. But for sure in the sandy soil where it had really low nutrients to begin with, I think it absorbing the nutrients was leading the plants to grow smaller.
Amanda, I wanted to ask, maybe I missed this because I was responding to questions, but what kind of biochar and where did you get the biochar from for your study?
Yes, great question, which I meant to talk about and I didn't in my rush to get through the slides. So it was a softwood biochar. So I think it's from loblolly pine. It actually was not sourced locally. Wakefield Biochar, which is a big biochar producer on Amazon, actually offered to donate the biochar for the study. So we ended up using that. But yeah, so it was a softwood biochar that we used.
Was it graded? Did it have a?
It was not, but I graded it to, I think it was 4 millimeters before we put it in.
Cool. Alex chimed in. Deb, did you see that one on red wine cap spawn and biochar? Any research?
Yeah. No, I haven't. It's another area I have not done. I've done a lot of work, but these questions are great. I haven't done anything in that area or read anything
What
related
about
to that.
Amanda? I know you are a mushroom grower. Anything?
Gosh, I
Included?
also should know things, and I don't right now, but I'm going to dive into that and read about it.
Cool. Alex, did you want to come off mute and elaborate at all? Or offer any experience or insights that you might have?
I just I incorporate Stropharia spawn into my nursery beds for perennial like tree and shrub stock, and I feel like anecdotally I see great benefit. So I just didn't know. Yeah, just curious on if there's like beneficial effects of combining with the biochar or any of that.
I would imagine since the bio, or sorry, go ahead, Jen.
Well, I was just gonna say that back to you, Amanda, after I say this, that I think the most important thing that I've take from anytime I listen to Deb talk is that not all biochar is the same, and that it's really important to ask the question first, like what resource concern are you trying to address? So if there was that's the way I would approach it, is like what is the thing that you think that biochar would contribute to that setting? Is that's a thought, I guess, to add to it. But Amanda, what were you gonna
Yeah, I
say?
was just going to say that it would make sense since the biochar can help retain more nutrients and the mushroom is going to need a lot of nutrients as it's growing, that maybe there's more nutrients available to be able to allow it to colonize more. But I'm going to dig into that more and get back to you.
You guys should meet probably sometime too. Like, I feel if you haven't met Alex already. How about one last question? I didn't capture anything above in the chat, but if there's any other last remaining questions, if you want to come off mute or drop it in the.
How can you tell if the biochar is fully charged?
I wish I had a magic wand for that one. I mean, you could, technically do a test and see, does it have nutrients in that material? But I think that's what I was saying. There's no like absolute rule for charging. Kind of think that 1 to 3 weeks has been sufficient before applying it to the soil, but there's no set number to knowing really when it's charged, Um, that at least those are the conversations I've had. But you could do testing to actually know the nutrient value of the material at the end. But people are usually, want to save money, and it's usually not necessarily if it's been combined for a number of weeks.
The reason I'm asking is because I've heard a number of times that after applying the biochar, the plants didn't do as good as they normally do. And I'm assuming it's because it wasn't charged properly or long enough.
Yeah, so I think both Amanda and I touched on this in our presentations, this idea of nutrient immobilization, or essentially tie up of the nutrients in the soil. So if you're applying, it would be the same with applying raw wood chips in the soil. You're applying a high carbon source, and it's affecting the carbon to nitrogen ratio happening in the soil. And so by applying a lot of carbon, the microbes don't have, they're basically eating it up, and they're utilizing whatever nitrogen is already in the soil, and so it's not available for uptake by the plants. And so to essentially offset the potential for the tie-up, that's the idea of inoculation, right? Is that we're trying to better optimize that carbon to nitrogen ratio into the soil, so we're not getting that tie-up of nutrients in the plants. The other thing with biochar too, and any kind of organic amendment and the overall soil health story is that, we might not see benefit right away. And while we don't want harm or any other negative impact to the plant, a lot of the benefits come over time. And so we might be offsetting nutrient inputs and other external inputs to, farming systems in a couple years down the line. We're not having those immediate benefits. But obviously, we don't want to have a detrimental impact to yields.
And that brings us right to 10:30. So I will do I guess the exit music really briefly, maybe running a minute over. So if you have to hop off, I appreciate that. But for folks who are listening to the recording as well, again, thank you, Deb and Amanda. I rely on you a lot to help me understand biochar more. I do want to announce that there will be a series of 3 farm small kiln demonstrations coming up, workshops starting in May. This is in the North Country. So everybody will hear about those as a follow-up to this presentation as well. We're really excited about it. Amanda's one of them, so you can meet her in person, Amanda and her husband, Lucas. And we're using a Kontiki model kiln that, so the point of those workshops are to, again, learn a little bit about biochar, continue to share our collective soil health knowledge, and to go visit the farm, and we're going to actually make biochar on site. So it'll be not necessarily a scalable model, but you certainly can make a pretty sizable volume of char, especially depending on your farm size and scale. So those are coming up. That'll be in the follow-up, and also a bunch of resources. But I want to end on a really important thought from Compost for Good's point of view, is that just as we learn more about soil health, it's an extraordinarily complex system that we are just starting to learn how complex and how amazing. It's not miraculous, but it kind of is miraculous. How the whole system interacts and all of the layers of the interactions. And, we can see from Amanda's research and Deb's presentation, there are many, many factors. So one of a really important, I feel, philosophical perspective is that to match that complexity, as we learn about the ways to address and support and nurture soil health, the answer is never is never a black and white answer. It's never you put your nitrogen on, you put your NPK, like that's it. Like that. So what we really, our mission, our goal, and with partners like Deb and Amanda, is to continually elevate the indigenous knowledge about soil health and to match the practices that we are promoting with the true essence of soil health. So that's part of our mission. It can be overwhelming, but that's why we like to, we take it here, then we dial it up, then we dial it up. But that's just a really important point of view that I wanted to share with this group. In case you are like, oh my God, where do I even start? That's okay. I think that's a normal reaction, but start here, go a little further, come back, start here, go a little further, go over there, continue with the trials, the demonstration sites, the research. It's our microbes and our bellies will thank us in the long term. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Deb and Amanda, and all the great questions. So stay tuned for a follow-up.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.